Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Denise Duffield, Associate Director of Physicians for Social Responsibility, Los Angeles, and I serve on the steering committee of Back from the Brink, bringing communities together to abolish nuclear weapons. The topic of our event today, growing support for nuclear abolition, is really what Back from the Brink is all about. And one way we're doing that this year is by organizing and advocating for HRES 77, a congressional resolution that was introduced in the U.S. House of Representatives by Representative Jim McGovern, who we are delighted to welcome here with us tonight. Thank you so much for joining us, Congressman, especially on this most consequential of days. Before we get started, I'd like to say just a few words about Back from the Brink. Back from the Brink is a US-based coalition working on a multi-year campaign to abolish nuclear weapons and advance a set of common sense policy solutions that can help prevent the real and growing threat of nuclear war. We were formed in 2017 after the adoption of the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons as a vehicle to build public support and political will for nuclear abolition in the United States. We organize in communities because we know that our members of Congress, whose voices and votes impact the executive branch, aren't likely to act on this issue unless they're hearing about it from we the people, their constituents who are demanding action, people who live and work in the communities they are elected to represent. In other words, people like you, all of us here tonight. Back from the Brink gives any individual, organization, or elected official the opportunity and means to get involved and make a difference. We are largely volunteer-led with the steering committee composed of representatives of our coalition partners, a mix of national and local grassroots organization. We have been endorsed by over 400 peace, environmental, health, science, faith, policy, and justice organizations, and we've organized 15 community hubs throughout the country. Our policy solutions have been endorsed by numerous civic leaders and experts, over 300 local and state officials, and through the effort of so many Back from the Brink activists and organizations, 77 U.S. municipalities, counties, and state bodies that have voted to adopt resolutions supporting our platform. And just recently, 154 organizations from across the country signed the letter we organized endorsing HRES 77. And thanks to Representative McGovern and many of you, Back from the Brink's policy solutions are also officially supported by 26 members of Congress who've co-sponsored HRES 77 to date, and we're really just getting started. And as we'll discuss tonight, HRES 77 calls on the United States to embrace the goals and provisions of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and to adopt Back from the Brink's policy agenda. It provides a critical opportunity as an advocacy and organizing vehicle for folks to urge their House representative to support nuclear abolition, and importantly, to also organize other groups, leaders, and cities in their community to advocate for HRES 77 as well. It's helping to cultivate real leadership on this issue within Congress, which is one of our key goals. We know from past experience, even if a vote never gets voted on, as support grows, more and more people in Congress start paying attention, focusing on the issue. It becomes a subject of discussion and debate, and it can force the administration to take notice. And it gives all of us a very concrete thing to ask of our members of Congress. Finally, as you know, growing support for nuclear abolition has never been more urgent. The threat of nuclear war is greater now, perhaps, than it's ever been. Yet it's also a time of many other serious crises: climate, economic, environmental, many racial and social justice concerns, all of which intersects with nuclear weapons. It's our job to make nuclear weapons visible and demand action, while also finding common cause with other movements and working together for a safer, more just world. Now I'd like to introduce Sean Meyer, who helped start Back from the Brink and now serves as a consultant to the campaign.
Well, thank you so much, Denise, and thank you all for joining us tonight, and thank you, Congressman. We've got about 110 folks thus far, and folks are coming on now. Before I introduce the Congressman, let me quickly go over the format. The Congressman has a short amount of time because of the debt ceiling vote, which is expected at around 8:30. He's going to give some brief remarks, and then I will moderate a Q&A discussion with him for about 15 or 20 minutes. And what we'd like to ask you is to ask your questions using the Q&A function, and we'll do our best to get to as many questions as we can. So it's my great pleasure to introduce my Congressman, Congressman Jim McGovern, who represents the 2nd District here in Western Massachusetts. Many of you may know the Congressman's long-standing leadership on so many critical issues, most notably hunger and poverty and human rights, and of course, nuclear weapons. And tonight, We are so pleased to have the opportunity to hear Congressman McGovern's insights and perspectives on the nuclear arms control and disarmament landscape in Congress, and really why our voices matter and what all of us can do to build support for legislation like HRES 77 and get many more members of Congress to make this issue a real priority, as Mr. McGovern has. So thank you so much for joining us, Congressman. I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Sean, for the introduction, and thank you, Denise, and thank you to everybody who's part of this effort. As you know, things are a little crazy right now in Washington, and so kind words are appreciated. But most of all, I want to extend my gratitude and my personal thanks to everyone who's joining this conversation tonight, because this is an incredibly important conversation. I can't thank you enough for all of your work on HRES 77, the resolution that I introduced on January 31st with my good friend and colleague Earl Blumenauer from Oregon. And as you all know, this resolution embraces the goals and provisions of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. It calls on the United States to lead a global effort to move the world back from the nuclear brink and to prevent a nuclear war. And it asks the U.S. to actively pursue and conclude negotiations on nuclear arms control agreements, including with Russia and with China, to renounce the option of first use of nuclear weapons, to end the president's sole authority to launch a nuclear attack, to take U.S. nuclear weapons off hair trigger alert, and to cancel the nuclear modernization program. Congressman Blumenauer and I have been circulating a dear colleague letter asking our colleagues in the House to join us as co-sponsors. Currently, the bill, as Denise mentioned, has 26 co-sponsors, including myself. That's already more than twice the number we had in the last Congress, and we've just gotten started. I see your good work every time I add a new co-sponsor. We'll add a couple of members back to back from Maryland, and then a pair from New Jersey will join. Next thing, Illinois, California members are asking to be added. And there's the ongoing campaign happening in my home state of Massachusetts. It's all around the country. Everywhere you campaign, it shows up here in Washington in new co-sponsors. And so your engagement on these issues is incredibly important. Right now, we have the president of Belarus announcing that there are nuclear weapons for everyone who will join the Russian-Belarus alliance. Kazakhstan is listening, so are others. North Korea is continuing to test missile launches. Iran is close to having weapons-grade uranium. And the US and Russia are modernizing and expanding their arsenals. So we need to hit the brakes and throw this car in reverse now, not tomorrow or the day after. The fact that each of you is out there talking to your friends and neighbors, engaging local city councils, your state legislators, and your elected members of Congress is critically important. If people don't re-engage on stopping the nuclear buildup and proliferation of weapons, we can toss the doomsday clock, because doomsday will be here. But I'm an optimist, and I know that we can make a difference today because we've all made a difference before. And so I'm grateful to be able to play a key role in your campaign. I thank you for your support of HRES 77. Sean, I'm happy to try to respond to questions, although I can't promise that I'm going to know all the answers. But again, I'm just happy you're here. I'm here with all of you, and so many are engaged.
Well, thank you, Congressman. And again, we know there's a lot going on at this very moment in the U.S. House of Representatives. So we appreciate your time, so as I mentioned before, folks can use the Q&A to ask questions, but I'm going to sort of, as the chair, if you will, ask the first question. And it sort of comes back to what you were just alluding to, Congressman. And it's, what do you say to those who say, is this now really the time to be putting forth ideas and policy proposals that really lay out a path toward nuclear risk reduction and ultimately global nuclear disarmament in the midst of this war and Belarus and all of these things that you just mentioned? What's your best response to those objections about, is this the right time to be doing this kind of work?
Yeah, it's precisely because world tensions are so high that this is the right time to do it. I mean, I think if things were calm and everybody was holding hands and singing Kumbaya, we were all getting along with each other, and maybe the urgency wouldn't be there as much. But I think we're seeing that we're in a very perilous moment. I mean, we mentioned the Belarus-Russian alliance and the promise of nuclear weapons. We're hearing more and more about using tactical nuclear weapons by Russia in the war in Ukraine. I mean, the talk of not just nuclear buildup, but using nuclear weapons is just more commonplace. So this is the moment. And I know, tensions are high between us and Russia and between us and China and us and Iran, but this is the moment when, maybe we need to, reach out and engage more directly on the issue of nuclear weapons. And maybe in the course of those discussions, we can kind of alleviate some of these tensions. But this is the moment, right? Precisely because things are so tense, because the world is so chaotic, and because people are, rattling the sabers and even talking about using nuclear weapons. So it's urgent that we engage members of Congress. Let me just say one other thing. The reason why this grassroots effort is so important is because I'm going to be honest with you. I mean, not only are nuclear weapons and how we control them and abolish them being talked about on a regular basis, we can't even get people to talk seriously about reducing, the size of our military budget. We're having this big debate today on this debt ceiling bill, and they're trying to balance the budget, and they're balancing on the backs of poor people mostly, but the military budget is left untouched. It actually goes up. And I said on the floor today, we need a new definition of national security. We need to start talking to our politicians about this. It's more than about bullets and bombs, right? It is about the quality of life we have for our people. It's education, it's healthcare, it's housing, it's making sure people have enough to eat. So this is an opportunity, because of all the tensions, for us to kind of redirect the conversation, move away from militarism, and then get serious about moving toward the abolition of nuclear weapons.
Thank you. We do have some questions coming in, and this is a tough one, and we'll start with a tough one. And this is from Noel in Northeast Tennessee, and pardon me if it's Noel or Noel. We are totally committed to having Congress bring us back from the brink, but we live in a state where, quote, everything the left proposes is wrong. With only Democratic sponsors, what can we do? And I have some thoughts on that, but Congressman, go ahead and, what's your, how do we make this bipartisan? How do we move this beyond, this is just the left proposing this?
Well, one way is, I think, to broaden the coalition and to bring in business leaders, people who may have some connections with some of these Republican members. I also, my politics are more on the left, but I don't view this as a left-right issue. This is this is a survival issue. I don't care whether you're Jim McGovern or you're, there's so many right-wing members of Congress now, I don't even know where to begin, but whether you're, Kevin McCarthy, I mean, the bottom line is we have families, we have kids, we care about our neighbors, we care about our country, our planet. So, this is, not about, liberal or left politics. And so, so I think, how we approach them and how we talk about this. Also, I think we can make the case that, especially during these times of budgetary challenges, there's a lot of savings to be had here if we do this right. And the monies that we're not spending modernizing our nuclear capabilities or building more nuclear weapons can go to other things, including deficit reduction, if that's where the conservatives want to put it. But I mean, I think there are a lot of people who are sympathetic to what we're talking about here today, who we can bring into the coalition, who have some influence with some of these people. And then, and if that doesn't work, you know what? we got to challenge these members of Congress.
That's right.
You know, the bottom line is, I always tell my constituents, I mean, I work for you, you don't work for me. If you get to if I get to the point where I'm not representing your values or what you care about, you know, you need to vote for somebody else. You need to elect somebody else. That's the responsibility of citizens. So, but anyway, I'm not sure that answers the question, but you know, I would, you know, and I think you mentioned, was it Noel is from Tennessee?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, you know, Steve Cohen is a Democratic member from Tennessee who we need to get on.
That's right.
Yeah, so talking to him would be helpful.
Well, I was going to mention too that you know, over the years, back in the day, Senator Corker, who was at a time the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. In fact, Senator Corker was one of the had one of the first hearings on the issue of sole authority several years ago. And of course, folks like Senator Lugar and others. So there is a history here of bipartisanship. The questions are coming in strong now. So another question that was asked was, can't the United States just begin to initiate some of these steps themselves instead of waiting for others countries to do so as well in a multilateral fashion? And Congressman, your thoughts on that?
Yes, and so part of getting more and more co-sponsors on this, I think, gives us a stronger hand in talking to the administration about taking some of these steps on their own, and you know, and taking a greater leadership role, and you know, and raising these issues more prominently in global discussions. So yes, so you know, an offshoot of this at some point, I mean, we need the co-sponsors, but we also ought to be thinking of, you know, direct appeals to the administration, asking them to do one or two, or you know, to show some good faith on this issue. So the answer to that is yes.
Well, an interesting follow-up, and I just lost the question here. Barbara was saying that when asking her representative, her Democratic representative, to co-sponsor the bill, the answer was no, quote, "I don't want to tie the president's hands." How would you respond to that? So it sort of gets to what you were just saying, Congressman.
Yeah. Well, you know, and you know, and I'm from Massachusetts, so we say words like this, but I don't mean to be impolite, but I would just, that's bullshit. I mean, I mean, really. Yeah, I mean, this is a resolution. This is a bill that doesn't compel or demand or tie the president's hands in any way. So you're not, but this is a way to signal to the president of the kind of policies that you want our country to pursue. So, you know, that's, you know, I mean, I've been around for a long time. You know, we come up with really good excuses to not do something. But I would go back to that representative. I would keep on pushing them, and because we're going to push them until they say yes. This is not about tying the hands of the president. This is about saying to the president, you know what? I don't want this. I don't want to see this world, you know, go up in one terrible nuclear flash. I mean, and with tensions rising between the United States and Russia and China, and with what's being talked about now with, you know, using tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine and the Russia, Belarus, and I mean, this. I mean, we need action sooner rather than later.
Absolutely.
And we need to tell the president this is one of our priorities.
So Paul Euler is asking, what are the best mechanisms to advance nuclear disarmament? Hearings, websites, social media, white papers, videos, TV documentaries. And so maybe, Congressman, sort of just your thoughts about other things that we as concerned activists can be doing to sort of advance this, and sort of, you know, beyond obviously getting members to co-sponsor your bill, but what other things can we do? And I think this is particularly germane to those folks who say, hey, my member has already co-sponsored the bill. What do I do now?
Well, I mean, first of all of the above. I mean, and you know, not just lobbying members of Congress, but some of the members of this coalition, are experts in this field. I mean, op-ed pieces, they can be placed in various papers all across the country. It doesn't have to be the New York Times or the LA Times, it could be the Worcester Telegram, or it could be, the Hampshire Daily Gazette in Massachusetts. I mean, it could be any, it doesn't, those local papers oftentimes generate support, but whatever gets more people talking and engaged is what we should do. I was around as a congressional aide during the original nuclear freeze movement.
I remember.
And there were, on college campuses, in meeting halls, in churches, in synagogues, all over the country, people would gather and bring experts in to learn about this issue. And then they became, advocates, utilizing social media, which was not around then. But I mean, you have the ability to communicate with people in ways that we never had before. So all of those things, I mean, whatever can get people talking about this and engaged, or to get them interested, is worth pursuing.
Thank you. A somewhat related question, and again, we're really trying to emphasize here, we've got 140 folks here who are working on this bill and doing work around the country. So we really want to focus the conversation in on the things that folks can do. And a question Martin asked, from your perspective, Congressman, in talking about your bill and other bills that other nuclear arms control related bills that you've worked on in the past, what have you found has been the sort of the arguments that are most convincing to your colleagues of what moves them to sign on, beyond obviously the obvious getting constituents to chime in? Are there particular, is it fear-based arguments? What are your thoughts on that?
I think for anybody who's following the news amongst my colleagues, and I think what we are hearing and what we are seeing, again, I keep on going back to the most recent thing between Belarus and Russia, and the talk of Putin talking, the talk of Putin possibly using tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine. I mean, I think people are concerned about it. I think they want to know what is the appropriate next step, and we have not been engaged in this issue as intensively as we were years ago. And I think people are trying to figure out, like, what do we do? What is, and again, what we're trying to do is say, okay, sign on to this resolution to show some support. That's a signal to the Armed Services Committee and the Appropriations Committee here. It's also a signal to the White House, who is following, that support is growing for a bill calling for the actions that this bill does. Cost savings. I mean, I had a lot of people, I mean, on the House floor today, talk to me about, the fact that we're spending so much on military expenditures, and in this case on nuclear weapons. Like, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
I mean, is that how we, so I mean, and even helping to try to come up with a new definition of national security, which is not, which has traditionally been about bullets and bombs. But I think more and more people are now open to understanding that, if you don't have shelter, if you don't have a house, you don't have an apartment, if you don't have access to food, those are national security issues.
Absolutely. So one question, this sort of relates to the question I just asked. Several people asked or pointed out things related to consequences of use, and several mentioned the most recent nuclear consequences climate study. And I guess to sort of boil this down to a question, do you think the average member of Congress has a fundamental knowledge of the number of nuclear weapons that exist in what happens when they're used? I mean, that study was pretty alarming in terms of what happens even in a limited nuclear war of
No.
only 100. Just horrific global consequences. Do you think the average member really understands what we're talking about here?
No, I don't. And that's where your engagement, I think, is helpful. I mean, introducing members of Congress to these studies and trying to, and by the way, it can't just be a one and done.
Right.
I said to you, I mean, it has to be, you have to show up at, and like many of you are doing, at town meetings, at, when they're on talk radio shows or on call-in cable shows or whatever. I mean, calling in or letters to the editor, just, to engage, finding out who their defense staff person is, engaging them, but getting them materials. I'm going to tell you something that's going to come as a shock to many of you, but intelligence is not a prerequisite for serving in Congress. Okay. So don't assume that people know a lot about this stuff. I guess if you're on the Armed Services Committee, you're expected to know more, but even then, just don't assume that they know everything, that they've been exposed to all the studies. And so if you come across an interesting paper, an interesting article, or an interesting show on TV or documentary, I mean, I would try to find a way to communicate to my member of Congress, to my senators about how they can get a link to it, and hopefully somebody will read it or watch it. But part of the job here is education, and you have to look at yourself as teachers, not just as activists, but as teachers, and so I mean it's a challenge, but it's what you got to do.
That's very helpful. I don't know if you have a couple more minutes, Congressman.
Yep.
Okay, so another question that came up a couple of times in the Q&A was, the president is the one who needs to initiate a lot of this international engagement with the other nuclear armed countries, and so I guess to boil the question down is like, why Congress? Why does Congress matter? Like, how does the actions of Congress affect the executive branch, in this case, the Biden administration, or how might it affect?
Well, I mean, we provide the money for a modernization of nuclear weapons for all of our military means, number one. Number two, I'd like to think the president hears what we think, because he's going to need our support on various things in the future. We're still engaged in this effort to help the Ukrainians, and I think there's a concern that we want to help the Ukrainians, but we don't want to see a major escalation that could result in terrible things happening, not just in Ukraine, but all around the world. So, I mean, Congress has, and by the way, the president's up for re-election. I think he wants us to be enthusiastic about him. And if he's lukewarm on issues of nuclear disarmament, or on controlling, nuclear weapons, I mean, then don't expect people to be terribly excited about his re-election campaign. But what we need to do is, and for those of us who are old enough, right? I mean, you remember, how difficult it was to have these discussions during the Cold War, during the Vietnam War. But that's when when things are tense, when things are particularly heated, this is precisely the time when we need to force these discussions, because this is when an accident can happen. This is when a miscalculation can happen. This is when something terrible can happen. We can be wind at the president's back if he does the things that we want him to do. And it says that, we don't need a treaty for the president to eliminate hair trigger alert or renounce first use. He can do that on his own. And so as we push this bill, we ought to be, selecting some of these pieces to ask questions of administration officials in hearings, or making a direct appeal to the president, to act on these things unilaterally. So, so there's a lot that we can do here. And I'll just say this, look, in many respects, what we're talking about here really is the ultimate and probably the most important global issue. But when you're here, I mean, this is like drinking water from a fire hose in Washington. I mean, we every day is a catastrophe and and a nightmare. And I mean, they wanted to default on our, on the full faith and credit of the United States and not pay our bills and ruin the economy. So we're reacting and trying to figure out what we can do. There'll never be a calm time here. There'll never be an opportune time when people are totally at ease and, let's talk about whatever. Yeah, we have to force this issue. And on the grassroots level, we ought to be polite. We want to be nice. But as my father used to say, it's nice to be nice, but not too nice. And when people are not being responsive, you don't have to be nice.
I often use the term, we have to make some folks uncomfortable.
Okay,
do you still have more time? And we got loads of questions, so it's sort of your call.
Yeah, I'm just we still got a few more minutes of the debate.
Okay, so one really important question that was asked is, again, sort of, this is in the activism sort of area. Folks are asking, so what's most effective in terms of reaching you all, or one's member of Congress? And so the specific question that was asked was, personal letters versus emails. I might expand that question to sort of just ask a general question about ways in which concerned folks, constituents, can bring an issue to their member of Congress. Is it important to try to cultivate a relationship with staff? Is it important to do visits in district offices? Things of that nature. Are those things impactful or more impactful? Are there things that are more impactful?
Yeah. Well, Tip O'Neill, who was the former Speaker of the House from Massachusetts, used to say all politics is local. And I think that was a brilliant observation. I would just add to it, all politics is personal. And so to the extent that you can make a personal connection, in person, if possible, you're cultivating a relationship with the member or with his or her staff. If you do a local visit, a broad representative group, I think, for a meeting is important. So it's not just, the people who have been, active on nuclear disarmament for 100 years. We want them. But again, that's when you say, do I get a local business person? How about a student leader? A faith-based leader? Trying to bring, a broad coalition together. But I think those personal meetings are important because I think relationships are important, and also staff. Cultivating relationship with staff is incredibly important. I mean, staff can be your best ally, or can frustrate your efforts if they're not on board. So you need that relationship with staff. So those are, if you can, an email that is substantive, not just like vote for whatever, but a thoughtful email, a letter. But I think in-person meetings are important. And let me just say why, especially on this issue. We're inundated all the time with facts and figures and statistics and graphs and this paper and that paper. Those things are really important. But sometimes in an in-person visit, you can help a member of Congress realize that behind all these facts and statistics and figures, how horrific they may be, there is a human consequence. There are human beings that will be impacted based on these decisions. And so, I think, I think those, any way you can get to somebody, but those personal meetings, I think, are really important.
That's really helpful, Congressman. One recurring theme in the Q&A has been, what about the Senate? Folks should know that we have made an effort to and have had conversations with various Senate offices about a companion to your bill. At this point, there is no such companion bill. But I perhaps just to get your thoughts on, in the absence of such a companion bill on the Senate side, what do you tell folks to do in terms, because everyone has 2 senators as well?
Well, maybe we, maybe we take a couple of items in this bill, right? For example, eliminating the hair trigger alert, right? Or renounce first use. And so if they don't want to do a bill, maybe they can help spearhead a letter on 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 of the items, that they could circulate in the Senate. I think that, the more co-sponsors we get in the House, then the more likely and the easier it is going to be for you to get someone in the Senate, because they're going to want to be part of this, right? But I would not, we can't ignore the Senate as much as we would like to sometimes, but we, and again, when you're advocating with your representative, there may be, you can do the same thing with your senator. They have offices in state, local offices as well. Sometimes they're a little harder to get a hold of and meet in person, but still try. But go and again, cultivate a relationship with their defense LAs, and let's see whether we can get something going.
Yeah, and we couldn't agree more. I mean, we have been saying exactly what you just said, that if we continue with our success in building the co-sponsorship of your bill, and we get to 50 or 60 or 70, I think, we're going to have a much better argument to make with our friends on the Senate side that, hey, let's rethink this. So that's exactly what our thinking has been. And again, as you said, there's no shortage of things to say and ask of your senators, even in the absence of a companion to your bill. So, we're at 8:38. I don't want to keep you, Congressman. So I just, but we'd love to have you for as long as you can stay. So,
I could do one more question. I think they're wrapping up debate, and then I gotta.
Okay. Okay. Let me just. This comes back to this question of sort of the what the president can do, and the question is there a precedent for presidents taking independent initiatives on this issue? And I think the answer is yes, but let me.
There is. I'm just trying to think of the example. But yeah, look, yes, there is, and this president should.
Right.
And he's tried to do some good things. And I think one of the things that all of us in the Congress need to do, including myself, is we need to be a stronger wind at his back.
Right.
We expect things as senators, we never say thank you. People like to be asked and they like to be thanked. That's the rule of politics. And so when he does good stuff, we want to be wind at his back. But yeah, he can. And so what we have to do is figure out what it is we want to ask him. In what order and how we're going to do it. But again, I go back, to this. The more people we get on this legislation, the more comfortable the nervous people around not only him, but around other members of Congress and other members of the Senate are going to be. They're going to say, look, there's support for this. People actually care about this. And we know they do. I mean, part of the challenge that you face is that we have a lot of people who care deeply about a lot of things who just don't know whether it's worth it, whether it's even worth talking to their elected officials. There's a disillusionment out there. There's a cynicism out there about, and the only way to cure that is that we actually show results. We get things moving, things that happen. But we're in this point where we need to build up more support to force things to happen. But look, we are, there's a lot that we can do. You've already done a lot, by the way, and I need to thank you again to everybody on this call. We just need to keep it going, and we need to be, creative in how we broaden our coalition.
Yeah. Well, Congressman, thank you so much for all the time you've given us and for your tremendous leadership. It's been a great pleasure to work with you and your staff on this, and we will continue to do so. We just we track the co-sponsorships every day, and we get excited as they come in. And there's a number of members who have and their staff who've indicated that they're likely to come on. So we're going to see those numbers go up, and we just so appreciate all you're doing for this important issue.
I need to once we get through all this craziness this week, maybe next week, to kind of make sure we get all the Massachusetts people finally on board. So I'll work on that with you.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much, and go vote now, I suppose. Okay, you take care. All right. Well, that was a wonderful conversation, and as expected, we had many more questions than we had time to answer, and so we apologize for that, and we did try to do our best to get through as many, and but we're going to keep the conversation going for a bit. What we'd like to do is sort of shift gears for the last 20 minutes or so, and again, probably some of the same questions that you were asking, we can get at in the remaining time we have together. What we're going to do is we're going to actually now turn on the chat, and what I like to do is turn it over to my colleague Danny Hall, who is the Director of Public Affairs at Soka Gakkai International USA, and he's going to briefly go over some of the resources and strategies related to HRES 77, and then we can spend the remaining time in conversation. And again, you all can use the chat function. It's now active, I see, and we would just ask folks to sort of keep your questions succinct in sort of questions and comments sort of on topic. So Danny, take it away.
Great. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm going to go over HRES 77 specifically and share some helpful tips and resources for your advocacy. And one thing I'd like to stress is it is our persistence and our dogged advocacy that is really paying off as more and more members of Congress sign on to the resolution with each passing week. In fact, our goal is to secure 50 co-sponsors by the August 6th anniversary of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. So let's all work together and make that happen. And now, if I could please have the slides. So first, let's take a look at what HRES 77 is calling for. HRES 77 calls on the President to embrace the goals and provisions of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and make nuclear disarmament the centerpiece of the national security policy of the United States, and calls on the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, all other federal and congressional leaders of the United States and the American people to lead a global effort to move the world back from the nuclear brink and to prevent nuclear war by, and these are the 5 policy points of the back from the brink platform. 1, actively pursuing and concluding negotiations on a new bilateral nuclear arms control and disarmament framework agreement with the Russian Federation before 2026, and pursuing negotiations with China and other nuclear arms states on an agreement or agreements for the verifiable, enforceable, and time-bound elimination of global nuclear arsenals. 2, renouncing the option of using nuclear weapons first. 3, ending the president's sole authority to launch a nuclear attack. 4, taking the nuclear weapons of the United States off hair trigger alert. And 5, canceling the plan to replace the nuclear arsenal of the United States with modernized, enhanced weapons. Next slide. We have 26 co-sponsors to date, which are listed on congress.gov and also on the Back from the Brink's HRES 77 resources page. Next slide. Our HRES 77 resources page has information to help you reach out to your member of Congress, help you write op-eds and letters to the editor, and help using social media. You can always get to this page from the homepage of our website. Next slide. Our HRES 77 resources page also includes a backgrounder for House offices. Many offices have requested this, so please do include it in your outreach to them. A backgrounder is basically a few sheets that go over what the resolution is and answer some key questions for staff to help them explain it to their member of Congress. Next slide. Another item you may wish to share with your representative is a sign-on letter that was signed by over 150 organizations. The letter was delivered in March, but the best way to ensure that your representative has seen it is to include it in your email or snail mail correspondence, or print it out and physically bring it to the office in person to drop it off or share it during a meeting. I've done this with almost every office I visited and highly recommend it, because as I share later, it really helps with your follow-up, which is key. Next slide. So with those resources at hand, you're ready to take action. As I mentioned, you can call, write, or meet with your House rep to urge co-sponsorship of HRES 77, and be sure to follow up. Personally, I found the greatest success when I physically drop off information about HRES 77 for the appropriate staffer and then begin following up every 7 days. I call and say, hey, my name is Danny Hall. I'm calling on behalf of the Back from the Brink campaign. You know, about a week ago, I dropped off an organizational sign-on letter in support of HRES 77, and we're really hoping the representative might consider signing on as a co-sponsor. But I haven't heard back yet, and so I thought I would just call to follow up and see if I could bump it and see if there are any updates. Usually, the receptionist will thank me for calling and check to see if the staffer is available. If they are, I'll introduce myself and ask for an update. Most often they are not available, and the receptionist will take down my information, my name, my phone number, my email, the resolution number, and the issue area. They ask for the issue area sometimes to make sure that they're communicating to the correct staffer who focuses on this area. They take this information down so they can write a note to leave on the staffer's desk. Usually, the receptionist will also recommend that I send an email, which I do. And this is really key, this getting a note on the staffer's desk and following up with an email to get it in the top of their inbox. So say another week goes by and I still haven't heard anything. So I call again and say, hey, my name's Danny Hall. I'm calling on behalf of the Back from the Brink campaign. You know, a couple of weeks ago, I dropped off this organizational sign-on letter in support of HRES 77. And last week, I sent a follow-up email to the staffer, but I haven't heard back yet. I just wanted to see if I can bump it and see if there are any updates. The receptionist, again, will take a note of these continuous efforts and will make another note to flag it for the staffer. And usually will ask me again to please send a follow-up email or to forward that last email to the staffer again. And so this combination of getting the receptionist to make a physical note that they place on the staffer's desk and you sending a follow-up email, so it's when they see that note, that email's in the top of their inbox, is really key to get this on their radar screens. They're very busy. If you don't hear back from them, it's often not because they don't want to deal with this or they're not supportive. It's because they're so busy, there's so many emails, there's so much information. It's really a battle to capture their attention. So that's why this dogged repetition really pays off in the end. And I just repeat this process every week until I get a response, and eventually I often do. You can also organize a Back from the Brink municipal resolution effort that includes support for HRES 77. We have sample resolutions on our advocacy tools page. You can also drop us a line anytime and we'll be happy to help you craft one. You can also organize a sign-on letter for your organizations in your community to help to send to your rep or state delegation urging co-sponsorship of HRES 77, and if possible, include state-specific issues related to nuclear weapons in your letter. I think this is a really powerful step. If you can get other organizations in the district where that member of Congress resides, organizations that they know about, that they might be interacting with in other ways, and they're supporting this with you, I think that sends a powerful message. You can also write letters to the editor in your local paper. Our resources page has sample talking points and guidance for this. You can also attend a Back from the Brink local organizing meetup via Zoom every month on the third Tuesday of each month. If you like to get involved, I encourage you to reach out to Jeremy Love at jeremy@preventnuclearwar.org, and he'll make sure you get on the email list so you'll receive the Zoom link each month to join the meetup call. And I encourage you to sign up for our mailing list and follow Back from the Brink on social media. There's a lot of great, interesting content on our social media pages, and our mailing list is one of the best ways to stay up to date with the latest information from the campaign. So if you're not already, please join our mailing list and follow us on social media. And let me make one final point. Co-sponsoring HRES 77 is the first step, not the last step or only step for members of Congress. As we have emphasized many times tonight, the idea is to cultivate genuine leadership and debate within Congress. We need champions. We need members who will make this existential threat a genuine priority. So if your rep has already co-sponsored, there are many things you can do to help them take that vital next step. Ask your rep to give a floor speech and get this debate started in Congress. Ask them to issue a public statement as to why they co-sponsored HRES 77. Ask them to post on social media why this legislation is so important. Invite your representative or the staffer with whom you've built a relationship to your local events. Share with them any letters to the editor that you've published on this topic. Invite them to participate in local town halls to further raise public awareness, and as Representative McGovern shared, to educate, to be teachers, and to bring together new stakeholders in the community and encourage more people to advocate for the adoption of Back from the Brink resolutions in their local cities, towns, and counties. And if some of those cities, towns, and counties are in another congressional district where that rep has not yet signed on, use that as an opportunity to educate them about the support of their constituents in their cities and their towns and their counties. And finally, reach out to the representative and discuss other nuclear weapons related legislation, such as those that appear each year in the National Defense Authorization Act. And with that, we're going to open it up for discussion. So please write your question in the chat. Denise and Sean will join me and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Danny. I'm having an issue being able to chat myself, but so there's quite a bit of chat going on, and it looks like Denise and others are answering some of the questions that have come in. One question that was asked, or a request, was if someone could post a link to the nuclear famine study. I just tried to do it, but I couldn't do it. So if someone else, either a participant or one of us, could do that, that would be great, because someone was asking, and that's a very powerful study. And let's see what we have for questions here. Sorry, just trying to catch up to all the chats coming in. I mean, one thing that I think is worth mentioning is some of what Back from the Brink will be focusing on as we sort of look ahead to the remainder of this year. And one of the things that we'd like to put a lot of focus on is the second meeting of the States Party of the TPNW, which will be held in November in New York City. And I think will be a tremendous opportunity for folks in their communities to be highlighting the fact that this major gathering of countries who have signed and are supporting the TPNW are gathered here in the United States. So I just wanted to flag that. Are you all seeing, Denise or Danny, questions that you want to grab at and take a shot at?
Been answering some of them within the chat.
Michael, Oh, here's a question that Paul asked a few minutes ago, and I thought this is a great question. In law school many moons ago, one of the many non-government and government actions in international law was the quote mobilization of shame. What actions would be most effective to mobilize and how? I think that's a great question, and I think it comes back a little bit to the conversation that the congressman and I were having toward the end about creating discomfort. I think there's this fine line between creating discomfort of our members of Congress and our elected officials and applying pressure in meaningful ways. I think there's a lot of great organizing around there, for example, in the climate space around, and even in the nuclear weapon space, the whole Don't Bank on the Bomb campaign is all about putting pressure on financial enablers of the nuclear status quo. And so, Paul, the short answer is I think more that needs to happen. Sort of, dare I say, confrontational activism, but it's really up to one's own comfort level, as an activist, as to whether that's something you want to do. But I think it's necessary for us to be doing more of that.
I would agree. And I think Denise provided a really wonderful resource in the chat with the PSR LA Community Cost Calculator, which can help you demonstrate to your representative in Congress how much tax money is going to nuclear weapons. And it's a concrete way to show that priorities about security are important, and we have to look beyond what Rep. McGovern was saying, bombs and bullets and arms-based security, and look instead at human security. What are the housing needs? What are the food needs? What are the healthcare needs in our community that are being unmet? And how do we feel about the estimated $2 trillion over the next 30 years that are going to be spent to completely replace the U.S. nuclear arsenal that can be spent on these urgent domestic needs? So it's not shame, it's just facts. And I think the more that we can provide our representatives with these concrete numbers, it gives them something to point to say, this is why we need to take action and move in a different direction. So please make use of that resource. I find it personally to be very helpful.
Yes, and I did want to add something about the administration, and somebody had a comment about not wanting to cross President Biden, and we put this in our backgrounder, which I'm going to put in the chat. But just last summer, President Biden, in the preamble to the Nuclear Posture Review, reaffirmed that the U.S.'s goal was ultimately working towards a world free of nuclear weapons. And there's no benefit to any nations of the world to resist substantive engagement on arms control and nuclear nonproliferation. So this has been put out as a vision. And there are some even Democrat members of Congress who don't want to cross perhaps the administration, but he has said that this is the ultimate goal. And so if this is the ultimate goal, the time to start working on these agreements is now. And by the way, if the ultimate goal is to have a world without nuclear weapons, we definitely shouldn't be building new ones.
I wanted to just highlight a question that Michael Collins put in the chat. How are social justice issues and nuclear weapons abolishment intersecting? Danny, I think you started to answer that question, right? To make these connections between the policy choices we're making, human security choices related to poverty and housing and education, gun violence, etc. So I think that's one of the answers to that very important question. I wonder, Denise, if you wanted to spend a minute sort of talking about some of how that worked with you all in Los Angeles, as you move forward with both an LA City Council resolution and a state resolution, and just sort of the general notion of sort of deepening relationships with the environmental justice community in Southern California.
Yes, there are numerous intersections with particularly environmental justice, but also racial justice and health and the environment and climate, some of which are in this page on our website that I posted in the chat. What we did in Los Angeles was, first of all, we had a diverse coalition. We had students, we had veterans, we had environmental justice activists, we had climate activists that were advocating for the bill. And we were able to put, you can customize resolutions. So we were able to customize in our resolution a whereas about how much LA spends and LA County spends on nuclear weapons and what that might otherwise go towards. And also that low-income communities of colors are hurt first and worst. If there is, and they are disproportionately in urban areas, so would be disproportionately impacted. The voices of all communities, particularly these communities, need to be engaged in this nuclear abolition. And we need to, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, really work to find common cause, because it's hard to see a world where we have, fixed climate, but we still have nuclear weapons, or where we have nuclear weapons, these issues really are tied together. And I think even more important than the points that we make are who we show up with to really, really try to build diverse coalitions. It makes a difference when they're hearing from people they're not used to hearing from.
There was a couple of questions, and there's some good commentary and discussion within the chat about money and influence. In addition to what folks are saying about, pointing to open secrets and other resources, I want to just put a plug in for folks to our friend and colleague Bill Hartung, who's been in this business for a very long time, is sort of the preeminent expert on the connection of money within the defense industry as it relates to this issue. And so I know when I was at the Union of Concerned Scientists, we worked with Bill on a study that looked specifically at money as it related to the ICBM, the new proposed ICBM. And so William Hartung, Hartung, is someone you might want to check out. I don't have ready access to or link to some of his work, but you could easily find it on the internet. Other questions? So we're at time. We still have 100 people on the call, so I don't feel like we need to end. Do you all want to keep going for a little bit longer, maybe another 5 minutes or so?
Sure.
Okay. Let's see what else we might want to highlight. People are doing a great job of sort of answering questions in the chat themselves and providing links. And I don't know, Denise, I think you did answer the question that we are going to save the chat. And in addition to I think it would be, we intend to do some kind of follow-up to everyone who registered, probably not until next week. So you'll get an email if you attended or if you weren't able to attend, and that probably will include a link to the recording. And maybe I might be speaking out of turn here, but hopefully we can at least include some connection or link to the chat so folks can have that.
This will help everybody for every Zoom call you're ever going to be in forever. Down there at the chat window where you see the little smiley face and those 3 little dots, if you click on that with your cursor and click save chat, you can save the chat to your own computer. So yes, we will save the chat and we can share it to you now. Forevermore, for any other Zoom call you go, you are empowered to save the chat yourself.
I've learned something today. Any final thoughts here, or anything? There were a lot of questions. Again, apologies. The questions sort of within the Q&A that we didn't get to. Anything else we want to highlight before we say goodnight? I guess my final comment or word would be persistence. I mean, I think what we're really seeing with this bill, with HRS 77, is sort of the payoff of just the dogged efforts. And I know this was said already, but I just want to sort of, put a fine point on it really is working. Our colleague here, Danny, has been just tremendous in just knocking on those doors and keeping those calls coming and just so many of these members, they're so busy and their staff are so busy, they just have to be continually reminded of this to get it to the top of their inbox, and it's working. We're very, very pleased with sort of the pace of members coming on. So I guess I would just encourage us all to be persistent and patient as we move this thing along. This bill, it was introduced weeks into a new 2-year congressional session. So we have this unbelievable organizing tool for 2 whole years. And so let's keep at it. Anything, Denise or Danny, you want to add before we say goodnight?
Again, you can reach out to us for questions. If it's an organizing question, Jeremy, oh yeah, we have 2 last slides. One way you can also take action to help Back from the Brink is to donate. We are largely volunteer, but we really could use your support. We need to scale up and scale up big time. Just what we've been able to do with us with a largely volunteer effort has been, I think, extraordinary. So, and if you give $75 or more, you'll get a Groovy t-shirt. And then finally, keep in contact with us. In the next slide, we'll have information on how you can do that.
Danny, any final thoughts or goodbyes?
No, just thank you everyone for joining this webinar. I know this is a big issue, a big challenge, but this is also why it's so fulfilling and can be so meaningful that we're really making a difference on something that's truly important. So really grateful for all your support thus far, and let's keep it going and show even better success into the future.
Thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and let's go forth and do good work. Good night.